But obviously up front, we've got to talk about Chris Cornell.
Yes, I mean we can't look that over for sure.
Yeah, of course, a few days ago, Chris Cornell passed away. So we, anytime someone in the music or rock world's passed away, we usually mention it. But if it's someone that we love, we talk about it a little more in detail, which is what's going to happen here now.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I really haven't been into Soundgarden in any shape or form in quite a long time. You kind of flew that flag, so, I mean, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking right now?
Well, I will say off the bat, like, what am I thinking is, I don't know, I think we've talked about this before, but, of course, obviously it's sad when anybody dies because it's affecting someone. Mm-hmm. Friends, family. If it's a celebrity, there's always some fan out there that is a diehard.
Yes.
That it's going to hurt at some point. But, for the most part throughout my life, when a celebrity or musician dies, I'm like, man, that really sucks. Mm-hmm. But then I go on about my day and weeks and whatever.
Yeah.
But when Dimebag got killed, like, it made me sick to my stomach for like weeks.
Yeah.
I just thought about it all the fucking time like it was my brother or something, which sounds weird. And that's not just because of the way he died, but because this guy was a huge part of my musical being, I guess. One of my favorite musicians.
Huge part of your life, period. Yeah. I mean, really.
And then the only other times that's happened was with Peter Steele.
Yeah.
And Janie Lane a little bit.
Yeah.
Because that was a huge part of my beginning in music, was Warrant and all those bands.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And this is the first one since those guys that hit me that way because of how much I love this guy's voice. So, I mean, even still, it's only been, 4 or 5 days, but still when I think about it, you get that you pit in your stomach like you do if someone is sick, or something's wrong.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense because I didn't know the guy, never met him. But like you said, it's a huge part of your life because for the better part of 25, 26 years, that guy's voice has been in my life.
Yeah, and it speaks to his ability and his talent and to how many people he touched with his music.
Yeah. And for me as a fan of music, I've got my 3 favorite singers of all time. Mm-hmm. Mike Patton, John Bush, and Freddie Mercury.
Yeah.
And to right under that, probably John Crosby. And those are all for a little bit, all different reasons. Mm-hmm. But then I've got a list of the top 3 greatest just pure rock and roll singers. Because you've got all those guys out here like Steve Perry, Bruce Dickinson, Rob Halford. The list goes on and on of truly wonderful, talented singers. But when it comes to just pure rock and roll, it's Robert Plant, Roger Daltrey, and Chris Cornell.
Definitely.
I put him up there with those 2. Like, it's just that when you think of just a voice that embodies everything, not only being fantastic, beautiful voice, but also being just something because when you think of Mike Patton, that guy can do anything. He's sang with opera singers, he's sang with rap artists, just anything across the board. But with Cornell or Plant or Daltrey, you think this guy was put on earth for one thing, and that's rock and roll, no other reason.
Yeah.
And he just embodied that perfectly to me.
I mean, definitely. I think that what he could do with his voice was insane. I mean, I remember, we all knew Soundgarden. We knew what that sounded like. We knew what his voice sounded like. And we knew it could do a lot of things. I remember hearing Audioslave for the first time and that first scream.
And Cochise?
Yeah.
What it was? Yeah.
And then when he just took off and started singing, and he had more rasp than I'd ever heard, really.
Yeah.
And I was just like, man, here's just another trick in this guy's hat. I mean, and where's this been for the last, 12 years or however long it was? It was so impressive. And, it's just a sad loss. It was shocking to me. It's like, I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, but when we heard about Scott Weiland, not surprised. It's sad, it's terrible, but we all saw that coming. But this, I had no clue. I just couldn't. I was like, what? I mean, there was nothing. There was nothing going on with this guy other than his amazing music that led anybody to think that this is going to happen.
Well, look, he went through all that shit the same way Weiland or Lane Staley or anyone did, with all the abuse, drug abuse and alcohol and whatever. Alcohol, I guess, was his thing later on. I don't know, but we don't even need to speculate on that. But the point is, he went through all that shit in the 90s and got through it.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, you don't ever associate him with that anymore, but you still always associated Weiland with it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Lane Staley, up until he passed away. But you never expected that from Cornell.
That's right.
Even though that's not apparently how he died, but still, it obviously led to the way he died, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? And we might never know. And, like I've said before about certain situations, it might not be for us to know.
Right.
But it's a terrible loss. And, I mean, it's just, we got to stop losing these guys. I mean, there's not, bands that come up now aren't going to get as big as these guys or ever.
Right.
And, I mean, it's just, it just sucks. It really sucks.
Yeah, and I mean, well, admittedly, grunge, I've always liked a lot of the stuff from it, but there's stuff I don't care about.
Yeah.
We've talked negatively about Nirvana before. Who cares? But the point is, of all those bands, we liked at least something from most of them.
Oh,
and
definitely.
I love a lot of that grunge era, because we were still coming up when grunge took over, it was our late teens, mm-hmm. So we were still immersed in all that stuff on the radio.
Yeah.
And, it's below the list on a lot, metal and 80s rock and all that stuff to me, but I still love it. But look, all those guys are gone now, except for Eddie Vedder.
I know.
Even the 5 main groups, they're all gone except for him, and then even Andrew Wood, Shannon Hoon.
Yep.
And those guys are amazing talents as well.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. But that defined that scene, was people dying young, I guess.
Yeah, the kind of moroseness of it. Moroseness, I don't even know if that's a word.
Well, speaking of that scene, too, it's
yeah.
We're talking about Cornell. I know that me and you both, we've mentioned this before a long time ago, that whenever all that stuff was going on, I know I did, and I think you did, gravitated towards Alice in Chains and Soundgarden because they were the 2 bands that were more metal influenced than the other ones.
Exactly.
And even you listen to the first 2 Soundgarden albums before Bad Motorfinger,
mm-hmm.
like Loud Love and Ultra Mega OK.
Yeah.
That's just freaking Sabbath with some other elements thrown in. You know? And it's crazy that you listen to that stuff, you really hear how great a singer this guy is, because he kind of toned it down whenever we got into the super unknown in the 90s era,
Yeah, yeah.
But to me, I don't want to piss some people off either, but this guy's better than Lane Staley. This is the best guy from that whole era. Lane Staley had Jerry Cantrell adding to that voice, that wonderful voice. Cornell, that was just him.
Quick story, funny you mentioned that. That conversation we had earlier out here on the patio about, hey, can I listen to some Soundgarden? Right. Am I going to be that guy if I do, and you told me, go listen to the Corridor covers that they just did on Liquid Metal Sirius. And I did, and, it was great, and I was listening to all that stuff, and it just, I don't know why, it just occurred to me, Chris Cornell's voice didn't have that, I don't even know, the warble that, Eddie Vedder and, Lane Staley kind of had.
Yeah.
Maybe Lane Staley not as much, but they both kind of had the pickle and mouth thing going on, as Butch Walker always liked to put it.
Right.
And, Chris Cornell didn't have that. And, in Nirvana, Kurt Cobain's voice was just, it was punk. It was more punk. It was more rough. And, I kind of tend to agree with what you just said. That was a long story to get around to just saying I agree with you, but he really had the best voice out of those guys.
Yeah.
Really did. He does stuff low. He can go real high. He can find a rasp. And then on top of all the songwriting, it's just fucking forget about it, man.
Yeah, I'd said that way back, this guy's one of the best lyric writers
mm-hmm.
there ever was, in my opinion. Just because, everything is top of the line. There's no, something like, what the fuck is that? There's none of that. Mm-hmm. And he's up, I'm talking top 5 all time, in my opinion. Him and Butch Walker and, Robert Plant or whoever wrote Zeppelin's lyrics, all that,
Yeah.
Just, he's up there.
Yeah, definitely.
And fortunately, well, I guess, did you only see him the one time at Lollapalooza?
Yes. That was the one time.
You can say that now, that there's probably a lot of people that would die to have that chance to see Soundgarden and the Ramones on the same day.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I was...
And top it off with Metallica and Rancid.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody about that yesterday.
Yeah.
And they were like, wow, fuck you. You saw all those in one day?
Right.
Sure did.
Well, I saw that, and then later that year... I can't remember if it was later that year or the next year.
You went to, like, Houston to see Soundgarden, right?
Yeah.
You said it was in some old grocery store that got turned into a venue.
Yeah, it was called The Warehouse. It might still be there.
That would have been cool.
Me and Jason Stewart went, it was while we were going to school at Oklahoma, at OU, and we went back to his parents' house for Thanksgiving week.
Yeah.
And they live in Houston, so we went down there and then went to the Soundgarden show. We're down there. I remember Rocket from the Crypt open.
Okay.
It stuck with me for some reason. But yeah, it was great. And then, yeah, that's the only 2 times I ever saw Soundgarden. And then...
You got to see Temple of the Dog recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last November, flew to Seattle with Bill Ray and saw Temple of the Dog. So that was literally, just being there in Seattle, seeing that and watching that and hearing him and that band was one of those real surreal kind of weird things that rank up there in my all-time concert experiences. And I'm not saying that now because he's gone. Go back and listen.
Yeah, oh yeah, I already know.
Yeah. Anyone that's listening, go back and listen to episode 97. I said it all then.
Yeah, and you know what? No one even has to go back and listen to anything. If you know Trent, he's not bullshitting right now.
But yeah, he sang, Andrew Wood is like one of those phenomenal, underrated talents of rock and roll. Mm. And there's barely anybody out there that could do that guy's voice justice. And Cornell was obviously one of those, and they sang several Mother Love Bone songs at that thing, and that was just unbelievable. The whole thing. So it's just kind of great that I guess they did that last year. They did 5 cities. I think it was 9 shows or something like that. And they... Good thing they did it when they didn't, because if they had waited another year, we would never got that chance to see that.
I bet they would have done it again.
Yeah, that was my guess. I'm like, I think we talked about that. I figured it would come again, but
it was too successful not to.
Yeah.
And of course, I was really looking forward to seeing him at Rocklahoma.
Right.
I hadn't seen him in 22 years, 21 years, or whatever. But, this is what happens, so.
Yeah, I will say there's several bands I'm greatly looking forward to at Rocklahoma, but I would put that was probably number 1 on my list, just because even though I'd seen him, like you said, it's been since 96 or 7. Yeah. And, so that was high up on my list just because I haven't seen Kim Thale in 21 years.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it was number 1 on my list, and that's no bullshitting, because I hadn't seen them in so long, and I was just like, I'd been thinking, I really need to bone up on my Soundgarden. I'm about to see him in a week.
Right.
And then this happened. It was fucking crazy.
Right. Well, you don't need us to tell you it's a horrible loss.
Yeah.
Crank up some Soundgarden, and don't just crank up Black Hole Sun and Film Black Days. Crank up some good shit like Slaves and Bulldozers, Jesus Christ Pose, Drawing Flies. I'm just naming everything off Bad Moon Free. Go to Down on the Upside and crank up Ty Cobb and No Attention and Pretty Noose.
Yeah.
That whole album's fantastic. Burden in my hand.
Yeah. Holy shit. What the fuck just happened?
Right. But, even his solo stuff, is all phenomenal. Mm-hmm. The recent stuff, like, man, I can't even remember some of the songs on that album because I only listened to it a couple times, but it was really good. And that's the thing about solo stuff. I always liked it, but I never gravitated towards it the way I did Soundgarden and Temple of the Dog. Mm-hmm. But one of my bucket list things was to see him solo. Yeah. Because, he played not only Soundgarden, Temple of the Dog, he played Audio Slave, he played his solo stuff, he did tons of covers. That's been circulating ever since he passed away, was the Prince cover and the Michael Jackson cover.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
No circulated the first time around a few years ago when he did them because they're so good.
Yeah. 2 things. I want to go back and listen to Original Fire by Audio Slave. I always liked that song.
Yeah.
And then another one, I read it at Rock on the Range, when they did that tribute, they also, like, I think after that, I'm not sure exactly when in the night, but they played his isolated vocal track for Black Hole Sun.
Oh,
They
wow.
played it over the PA. I bet that was pretty heavy,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, that would be kind of eerie.
Yeah.
Almost.
Oh, definitely.
But yeah, I mean, if you've never listened to their early stuff,
hmm
like the first couple albums, like I mentioned earlier, it's just pure raw, heavy rock.
Yeah. Definitely.
And listen to Guns N' Roses covering Big Dumb Sex if you get a chance to. You had to
Yes.
throw it in.